Aidan, it's always so exciting to have you here and talk about the amazing work that Interface is doing. First of all, thank you so much for coming.
Absolute pleasure, Davina. Always is, actually. I think we're very well aligned.
You have a big announcement for us today. You know, Interface has recently become the only carbon neutral, including scope 3 manufacturer. So all the way through scopes 1, 2 and 3. Like, that's a big moment. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Well, sure. I suppose as a manufacturer, I mean, our big focus has always been on reducing our carbon impacts, obviously, energy and the materials we use to make our products. And that being the case, we've been very much focused on redesigning those materials, looking at it really through 3 lenses: low embodied carbon on the material side, green chemistry, obviously, safe for health and the environment, and thirdly, actually, circularity, designing with circularity in mind. So with those working together, and then running our factories on renewable energy, we've been able to substantially reduce our carbon footprint. I mean, when you think about all our factories run on renewable electricity, indeed Europe and the US are on renewable gas. Next year, good old Minto, operating here outside of Sydney, we'll be on renewable gas. We're changing over to biomethane from the Malabar project in collaboration with Gemini and Sydney Water. So that's a really great way to actually reduce our footprints of our factories. And then we have to dive into our supply chains, obviously, because nearly 50% of our emissions globally are in our scope 3 with our supply chain.
Well, that's what's so exciting about this certification and the thing that everyone would love to hear more about. You know, we're talking about external factories, we're talking about supply chain management, we're talking about, the whole box and dice. Can you tell everyone a little bit more about how you achieve this?
Well, sure. I mean, I was at a conference recently and people were talking about how's climate going to affect our business, and 28 years ago we flipped that. We were asking how's our business going to affect climate. That was really set us on that sort of mid-course correction. Yeah. Real purpose driven. So what we did was we set some targets, we developed a roadmap, and then we put a metric system in place to measure our progress against plan. And very, very quickly we could see where our big impacts were. Yep. Indeed, I talk about scope 3 being pretty heavy on the supply chain side, but interesting enough, use of sold products, 30% of our emissions lie there with our clients. So we actually had to look at those as well. And in 2018 then, we actually developed our carbon neutral floors program. Yep. So that meant that we were carbon neutral across the whole life cycle for all our flooring products. And that took us about 85% of the way towards carbon neutrality. So that last little 15% was all we had to do. Amazing.
So what does beyond carbon neutral look like for Interface?
Well, again, carbon neutrality for us is a milestone. We like to say that it's really the destination is beyond zero. Really, it's becoming regenerative, become a carbon negative business, and we actually have a goal of 2040. I've probably talked to you about this in the past. And to get there, we have to again dig into our supply chains, look at the materials we're using, look at more bio-based material, recycled content. So our ultimate goal then is to become carbon negative, but our next big milestone is science-based target.
Perfect.
So we are taking on science-based targets 2030 and really aggressively reducing the remaining greenhouse gas emissions associated with our manufacturing and our supply chain. And that involves a 50% reduction goods and services. That's a big chunk of it. Another 50% reduction in the scope 1 and 2 emissions, because we do have some factories that aren't across the line yet. And we acquired Nora some time back, and they have a bit of work to do on their footprint. And we're working with them. They're part of the company now, so we're all aligned in that, and we're all focused on reducing those emissions. And thirdly, we're actually looking also at employee commuting and travel. We're going to do a 30% reduction in emissions associated with travel. And that really involves our employees. It gets them engaged in this whole mission to reduce our footprint. So 2030 is the timeline, and we've set our science-based target.
Always good to have a next milestone, and you're always setting a next milestone. So we so often find you leading in this space, but one of our goals is we've got to take the whole market there. How do you feel about setting an example for the whole market in this context?
Interestingly enough, I did not make such a big deal myself personally about being a carbon neutral enterprise, but I do see a lot of other companies out there striving towards that now, and they've achieved great success in that goal. Sometimes it's maybe a bit more humble and not thinking about being a leader, because when you're actually out there at the front, some people tend to look at it and go, this is just too hard. You know, okay, Interface is 28 years of that. We've got now 8 years to get to 2030. Where do we start? So it can be actually quite overpowering for smaller businesses when they see the success of a company like Interface. And when you think about it, Interface is not really a big company either. It's a $1.5 billion corporation, and that's not big by most global standards. But nevertheless, I think we've shown that you can achieve the goals that you set if you actually have the right measurements in place and keep focused on the goal. I think that's key.
So you heard it here, keep focused on the goal, set a plan, measure everything, and then that's where you start, and that's your pathway from there. Well, what a privilege. Thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you, Davina. It really is a pleasure coming back again to GBCA here in Barangaroo.